We are so excited to have Claire Sanamon with us tonight. She is the investigative journalist and developed and produced crime stories for CBS News for nearly a decade. She is credited with over 20 episodes of 48 Hours, including murder for hire stings, cold case kidnappings, and assassination attempts. Just another day at the office, right? Yeah. In 2019, Sanamon began contributing to 60 Minutes with The Ranger and the Serial Killer. She built her unconventional career one story at a time, rising up through local media to national television and her own network podcast, Final Days on Earth, with Claire Sanamon. A return Peace Corps volunteer with eclectic taste, she is always on the hunt for her next adventure. And we're so excited. We love debut books, and especially feel very, very thankful to have your the kickoff to this tonight. So, can you tell everyone a little bit about your background and what brought you to Baylor?
So I started out in local media. I graduated from Baylor. I had a degree in professional writing and a minor in journalism, and I've used them both quite. Yep. It's dual. I have dual citizenship with those two schools. So I always knew that I wanted to be a writer. I said, one of my life goals was get paid to write full time, and I knew that could look, a lot of different ways. And I went to the Peace Corps after college, and I taught English as a foreign language in Ukraine. And while I was there, I was also writing for the Wacoan, and I wrote a monthly column for them, and I also was able to pitch an op-ed to the Wall Street Journal called Not Your Father's Peace Corps about all the changes in the 50 years that the Peace Corps had been around. And so I was always looking for ways to tell stories and to tell unique stories. And so whenever I ended up in local media, I was working for People newspapers in Dallas was my first job, and got a colleague here. And I was covering, everything as a general assignment reporter, and the police blotter was one of the things that was on my to-do list. And, I found a lot of stories hiding in plain sight there, and that's where I discovered the crime beat.
Yeah, I love to hear the story of your first case and kind of the following there. So can you tell everyone, give them a little taste of that story?
Sure. So my first big true crime story, I was working at Culture Map Dallas, and I had just started there as a managing editor. And one of the things that I had said is that I would leave People newspapers if I could carve out time to do investigative journalism. And that was really important to me, and I knew that was something that I wouldn't get to do everywhere. A lot of people don't have budgets for investigative journalism anymore. And so I wanted to make sure that if I was going to take this new job, that I would get to make it, what I wanted. And so that was something that was really important to me. And pretty early on, I came across a story, an Associated Press story, that said, local woman pleads guilty in the death of her husband. And, was only going to have to serve 9 years. And I thought, who gets a plea deal for murder? And, in Texas, what's going on here? And so I started digging into this woman, and I learned that, her name was Michelle Williams, and she had actually called 911 and said that there'd been a home invasion, and that, her husband had been shot by a man in black. And it turned out it was all a fabrication and all an elaborate ruse, and she was actually the killer. And so I ended up doing a 3-part investigative series on her while she still had a plea deal, while she was, theoretically going to serve very little time, probably about 9 years, and then get out. And after I ran my investigative series where I uncovered many cons that she had perpetrated throughout the years, including lots of faked pregnancies, she was in the middle of faking a pregnancy with twins, and that's how she was able to get the state of Texas to give her this sweetheart plea deal, because they believed that she... Yeah, exactly. Bless her heart. Yeah, so it was just an unbelievable story. And so through my reporting, her plea deal was thrown out. She went on trial, and she was actually found guilty and sentenced to 60 years in prison. So it was a really rewarding experience to see that, I can make a difference with my reporting. and I can affect the justice system. And it really gave me that fire to, find these stories, even if they're being reported other places, there are things that are being missed. And there's a way to tell the story, more completely. And so that storytelling got the attention of 48 Hours on CBS, and I became a consultant for them. And then, the rest is history.
Yeah, I was telling Claire I was listening to her podcast, Final Days on Earth, which I highly recommend listening to that story. And it was, I could not stop listening to it till I finished the entire thing. It was pretty fascinating. Well, I was actually talking to a publicist last week who's a millennial, and we were talking about the first news story we really remember, and he was talking about the first news story he remembered as a millennial was the O.J. Simpson trial. And I thought, I was thinking about this book and why it is that we are so obsessed with true crime. And maybe a lot of it is these kids grew up with the O.J. Simpson trial. Why do you think that the true crime genre is so popular?
I think that we're always fascinated by this, unusual behavior and this sort of outliers, right? And the kinds of people who commit murder, they are completely outside of the norm of human behavior. And so I think we're attracted to that. And I also think as women, it's a way to consume something that, we all recognize that we're vulnerable in so many ways. And so I think a lot of women enjoy reading, watching, listening to true crime because it's sort of a safe way to take in these scary things that could happen to us, that could, happen to people that we know and love. And so I think that, we're drawn to these extreme experiences and knowing that they are true, that this really did happen, and that people can learn to go on after, the worst imaginable outcome. I've found it really inspiring, just the resilience of the human spirit, that you could, have this tragedy in your family and, there could be this complete unjust situation, but you could still find a way to carry on with your life, to have joy, to find, new purpose. And so I think, there's something we can all learn from that.
Well, I absolutely love the book. I read it in one day. I could not put it down. And I want to put you on the spot a little bit and have some superlatives. But what is the most satisfying trial or process that you ever reported on? That is putting you on the spot. So,
well, I think the most satisfying story that I covered was the attempted assassination of Judge Julie Kasurik in Travis County, just down the road in Austin. And so that was an incredible story for me because she survived. So this is a sitting district judge, the first female criminal district judge in Austin, Julie Kasurik, and she had been on the bench for many years. And she's coming home one night. Her 15-year-old son's driving the car. They are coming home from a football game, and they drive up to their house, and someone unloads on their vehicle. And so she is just within an inch of her life. The son calls 911, but she miraculously survives. Not only that, she files for re-election from her ICU hospital bed. And so, yeah, right? I mean, talk about, just an incredible woman, right? And so just an unbelievable role model. And she said, you cannot intimidate judges. You cannot eliminate us. And so they went back through her cases, and they were able to find, out who her killer was. And it was someone who had been in her court, unbelievably, someone that she was recommending probation for. But they misunderstood. They misunderstood what was going on in their own case, and they thought that she was the enemy and that needed to be eliminated. So they found the killer. He went on trial in federal court, was found guilty, sentenced to life in prison, and she continued. She's on the bench today. And her son was able to move on and grow from, the trauma that he witnessed his own mother being shot. Now he works for an organization for other children who've been affected by gun violence. He's now graduated from UT, and there's so much brightness in that story. So that's the one where I'm like, wow, It's incredible that she survived. She's such an example. And, you know, the justice system worked in that they caught him. He's in federal prison for the rest of his life and, you know, no longer a danger.
Okay, and the other superlative is, what is the scariest criminal you ever came face to face with?
So there are a lot to choose from here. I'm probably going to go with my first serial killer. As I say in the book, you never forget your first. So this was Eric Williams, and he had murdered 3 people. He was a former justice of the peace, and he had been fired for office supply theft. Like, basically, it was a really bad, like, sort of local politics thing. And, you know, he was using computer monitors from his home office, and they filed felony charges, theft charges on him, took him to trial, and he was convicted. So he lost his law license. He was no longer justice of the peace. But he waited like 3 years and calculated and planned and shot in cold blood the prosecutor, then the district attorney, and his wife. This was in Kaufman County, Texas. This went, I think it was 2013. So after all this went on, he's killed these people. He's been caught with all of his getaway vehicle, his homemade napalm, his, you know, arsenal in a storage unit that he had stashed everything away in. And so I'm talking to him after his trial. He's been convicted, but he's awaiting his sentencing. And I go see him in jail. And I'm face to face with him. And I saw just the blackness in his eyes. Like the ink blots is how I described his eyes. Like they were just totally void. And it was my first time witnessing that. And if you look at photos of him from earlier, like he has light in his eyes. And so it's this really bizarre thing that I would never believe if I hadn't seen it myself. But I came to recognize that sort of void in different killers' eyes. And it was always after the murders. And I just really believe that it's a darkness that takes over their soul, and the eyes are the window to the soul. And I've seen it. And so the way he could just look into me and it was like completely dark was just really disturbing.
One of the things I enjoyed when I was reading it was that you'll tell stories like, well, I told my boss I was doing this, but I was really doing this, or just different ways you were talking to attorneys to get the story. How did that feel to confess that in the book? And has anyone said anything to you now that they have seen the truth?
So the book comes out tomorrow, so I'll let you know. I talk about how this is a tell-all book, and the person I tell on the most is myself. I didn't want to pull any punches, and so I really wanted to, tell the full story and the full truth. And so it felt very funny to tell on myself, and very like, why am I doing this? No one knows. But I felt like it made it authentic to do it that way. And so, yeah, I talk about, the times that I snuck into jail with defense attorneys because they invited me to. And, I'm having these sort of ethical quandaries, but it's like, well, if I go with them, I can get a story that no one else is going to have. Or I can just be like, oh, I don't know how my boss would feel about that. And you just go on ahead. That's just not me. If you know me at all, I'm going to take the risk. So I would go, and it would get me into rooms and places that I just never imagined.
Yeah, I was thinking, Claire, you dirty dog. That's well, and we talked a little bit in the back about just the true crime genre and writing for television, and there are cliches in the true crime genre. And can you talk a little bit about what those and why they are to be avoided?
So one of the things when I was working at 48 Hours, our executive producer called a meeting and said, we're getting rid of these true crime cliches in our scripts. And so, she had a list of things written out and said, these are no longer allowed in 48 Hour scripts. And tell me if you recognize any of these. This woman, she just lit up a room, right? Whenever she walked in, Billy over here, he never met a stranger. right? He'd give you the shirt off his back, right? And we were also not allowed to call any murder shocking because every murder is shocking, right? So we had to find new ways to talk about these things because it just became, just sort of formulaic. And we would even say like, oh, it's the she lit up a room act, like splitting up the episode into 6 acts. And, we just knew that we could be more descriptive. We could give the audience some different language.
All right, so talk about the decision to, after you have been writing these stories and chasing the stories, why did you decide to write a memoir about it? Especially in your 30s, writing a memoir, that's pretty bold. But what made you decide to make that jump?
So I'll tell you a little secret. The only reason this book exists is because it's so hard to make television. So I actually have been developing a show about serial killers that I've been shopping around. I went to Netflix, I went to, Warner Brothers, I went to Paramount, all these places. And I really felt like that show was going to come out first. Whenever I quit CBS, I quit it to make this show about serial killers. And then one day write this book. But everything was taking so long, takes so long to make TV, that I was like, what can I do that I don't have anyone else that I'm waiting on a callback, a green light, And I thought, well, no one can write my memoir but me. So I guess I'll just sit down and write it. And I would just say I'm going to write for 2 hours and then check my email and see if anyone's messaged me about this show that I really want to make. And I mean, I have emails about that show in my inbox right now, y'all. It's still like chugging along, but hasn't made it. But I just realized that the book I had so much more control over. And these were stories that I desperately wanted to tell and that I had lived so recently that, if I wasn't going to tell them now, I feel like a lot of the details would have been lost. And so I just decided to jump at the opportunity right in front of me.
I was thinking that you have really done it all, the whole gamut, but with the true crime genre, the long form journalism, short form journalism, the book, the TV show, and even podcasting. What form do you enjoy the most, and what do you think lends itself best for true crime?
So I always say, people ask me like, what's your favorite story? And I'm always like, the next one. So right now, like the book is my favorite because it's like the new child, right? So it's the new baby. And so I'm really enjoying getting to tell stories on the page and getting to go so detailed without having to get anyone to go on camera. It's just hard to get people to go on camera. And that, part of television, you do so much work behind the scenes before it ever gets on the air. And so there's a lot of satisfaction in pulling together a television, show and getting to have all of those elements. But, the idea that I was able to write this book and use like photography that I had from, the stories that I'd covered, but I didn't have to go to anybody else, was just this amazing gift to be able to write like that. Television is so collaborative. You cannot make a television show by yourself, right? And so I definitely did not put this book out by myself, but I did write it, by myself. So that part, it just allows a lot of creative freedom and just getting to really, no one knew these stories like I did. And so getting to really just kind of luxuriate in them and decide how am I going to tell it and where am I going to put, all these different pieces, to have that decision making within myself was incredibly satisfying.
And can you talk about the process of getting the book from your brain to where it is today or where it is tomorrow? What was the publishing process like for you?
So I had this idea. It was a Post-it note on my desk for about, 5 years before I sat down and started writing it. I like to keep a lot of Post-it notes. So this was one. And it said Killer Story, The Truth Behind True Crime Television. And I had that title and subtitle in my mind. And, I started to just kind of write scene by scene, things that would come up for me. And the opening chapter of the book, when I snuck into jail with a defense attorney, that was the first thing that I wrote. And it really felt like this is going to be, the beginning of the book. This could be the beginning of the book. And the other chapter I wrote is somewhere in the middle, and it's about when I was detained in Travis County and accused of felony evidence tampering. And that I wrote those two chapters first, and I shared them with some other writers, and I was like, do you think I can make a book out of this? And I felt like I got enough positive feedback that I wanted to go in, and so I really went scene by scene, and I wrote it like a television show because I actually see it as a scripted show. I've talked about how these are the stories that you think that you've seen on television, but it's the story behind the story. And so I really tried to write it. You said you read it in one day. That's the goal, right? I wanted to write it. I wanted you to think just one more chapter, and try to really leave it with these cliffhangers and create that urgency. And so I spent about a year writing it once I really committed to doing that, and then I had looked up some of my wish list of agents. And if you've ever tried to query and sell a book, they have these periods of times where they're closed to submissions. And so my favorite agent, who ended up becoming my agent, was closed all summer. And so she opened after Labor Day weekend. And so that gave me a great goal that I was going to send her, my query letter after Labor Day weekend. And so I sent it to her and 9 other people because, hey, you got to cast a wide net. And I was really, gratified that I heard back immediately from 4 agents who said, I want to hear more. I'm interested. And so I ended up being able to choose my agent, which is an incredible thing to do. And, then she wanted to put it on submission pretty much right away. So we put it on submission, I want to say October, sold it in November, and then I had to wait like 15 months for it to come out because of the way publishing schedules work and shelf space and all these things that I got to learn about. So it's been a long process, yeah. But I'm so excited to be here. It's surreal. Yeah.
Well, you talked a little bit about she does have a podcast, and she teaches. Well, you teach at Baylor University, a podcasting class. So, can you tell everyone about that class that you teach, and a little bit about your show, so they can tune in?
So, I teach a class called Professional Podcasting in the fall, and it was the first time this class was offered in the Department of Journalism, and so I was able to make it a project-based class, and we had 4 shows that we launched into the world with Rogue Media Network. And it's really just a whole semester of developing your show idea, honing in on what your branding is, on what your show will be, on the structure. And then, we start recording episodes and doing, screenings of the episodes and having group feedback and editing those. And so it's just been really exciting to see, these shows come to life. I feel like I'm like the fairy pod godmother of these shows. So it's really fun that, these shows now exist and you can listen to them. And, I hope to continue to help people find their voice and make their shows, because no one just listens to one podcast. They're always looking for their next listen. And so my podcast is called Final Days on Earth, and it's deep dives on cold cases. So one season looks at one case, and I go deep, all the angles, possible scenarios. I follow the story wherever it takes me. And that I've had 3 seasons of that. And then I've just done a spinoff. If you're around podcasters long enough, we love a good spinoff. So my spinoff is called Justice Pending, and it's a weekly show with my true crime bestie who lives in New York, and we talk about all the cases that we're considering for the next season of Final Days on Earth. So we're kind of workshopping them in real time.
I love all the behind the scenes, and again, the book was fantastic. Probably, one of my favorite memoirs I've read in a very long time. A little unusual. Usually it's the Ina Garten type, so this is very different. And I'd like to open it up to questions that you might have for Claire. Does anyone have a question? Yes. Go ahead.
All right, so that was Chad Fineski, for those of you who don't know. Local legend here, married to the lovely Rachel, my lacrosse coach back in college. And yes, I would love for this to turn into a television show. That was his question. I think we have some great journalist memoirs that have turned into really interesting media properties. The Devil Wears Prada. Did you know that started out as a book about fashion journalism? And then Top of the Morning, which turned into the morning show on Apple TV. So I see this as every bit as entertaining as those, but plus murder. So you have all of the news, all the journalism. Yeah, yeah. And then you get, someone getting killed in every episode. So yeah, great question. I feel like every day that doesn't end in disaster is a beautiful day. I'm grateful for the little things, for the simple pleasures, and I love my normal life. Just the idea that I'm not dealing with something as traumatic and serious as so many people that I know have had to deal with. I don't take that for granted, and so I do think it's just made me more grateful for the good days.
My husband's a criminal defense attorney, and sometimes we say, "Okay, you know what? This is not a dinner time conversation. Put a pin in that. We'll get to it later." Yes. Anybody else?
So I don't know about on call at all times, but I do have some good friends that are attorneys, including a dear friend that I've known my whole life. Yes, so I do get a lot of legal advice. That's definitely true. And the book had a robust legal review as well. So yeah, you always got to know a good lawyer or two. Yes. I did not. No, no. That was a game time decision. I had to go. I had to get in there. So, yeah, looking back on it, I'm not sure any lawyer would have advised me. And whenever we had the legal review of the book, and it opens with me sneaking into jail with the defense attorney who I name in the book because I have to name the case. Like, I could make up things, but it would just get so convoluted. So the legal review started off with a bang in the opening chapter. And the attorney was like, "I don't know if we can say this. This is highly unethical, and he could be disbarred." And I was like, "But it happened. Like this is the defense of libel is the truth." And so this, truly, truly happened to me. And it wasn't the first time. It wasn't the only time that a defense attorney said, "Hey, if you want to get into jail, you just come with me, and I'll let you talk to the defendant." And so it was kind of a relatively regular occurrence in my life. I talk to other producers. Apparently, they don't get snuck into jail. I don't know what it is about me, but that was kind of normal for me. Yeah. I would love to write another book. I have in mind, I'm just calling it the sequel right now, but about what I've been going through trying to get this television show made because it's been wild. And there was a point where I was like really wondering if I was going to have to take legal action. Like you wouldn't believe how hard it is to hold on to your own idea for a television show is very difficult. So I feel like there could be another book there, definitely. Yes, absolutely. So I always, was very aware of the fact that nobody had to talk to me. No one was required to talk to me. And so I took it as a great honor to get to speak with these victims' families and really a high responsibility to allow them the opportunity to participate in their own story. As victims of crime, they have so many things out of their control, and so many times where they don't get to choose, what's happening next, but they could choose if they spoke to me. And so, I go through it in the book how I would just be, gosh, I don't want to go approach these people. I don't want to go tell them, that I'm a journalist and I'm doing this story. But the truth is, if it wasn't me, it was going to be somebody else. The story wasn't going to go away. And so I knew that I could do it as sensitively and responsibly and ethically as possible. And so I would always make every effort to approach the victim's family in writing first. I would find a way to write to them. I would text message, I would email, I would send physical letters to a business address or a home address if I didn't feel like that was going to be too invasive. And then I would try calling. And then I would try to have done all of that before I ever approached them in person. And so that usually went well for me. And I got a lot of responses back to those letters that I would send. And, a lot of times I would tell them, if you don't ever want me to contact you again, I won't. But like this, I'm doing my job here, and I'm sure I won't. I'm probably not the first journalist to ask you these questions, and I won't be the last. But if you like to talk to me, then I'll listen whenever you want to talk. And so I was able to, I think, reach a lot of these families in a way that I hope that they're glad that they participated.
I noticed in the book it felt very respectful and not exploitative at all. So I'm glad you said that, because I do appreciate that in the book. Did you have any advice for journalism majors? I think we have quite a few of them in here.
So speaking to my people, right? I think it's the greatest job in the world, and I don't think that you should ever be afraid to work in journalism, like that you can't make a living. You can make a living. There are always people looking for great stories. And I really think that, I've heard so many doomsday, journalism's dead, print's dead, this is dead. It's all still here. It looks a little different, but I think that if you're, committed to story hunting, then the jobs will find you, and, it'll just be the greatest career that you can imagine, because you get to tell stories for a living. And, I just don't think there's anything better. So my dream is that I'm able to hire someone to do my social media full time. That would be great. But yeah, I've had a couple of great interns through Baylor, through the journalism department, who've really helped me with all sorts of, graphics and getting the word out. I feel like the discovery problem is a big problem in podcasting and in books. You can make the greatest product, but if no one knows that it's there, it doesn't get the attention that, perhaps it deserves. And so that's something that I'm really trying to learn about, and to, use people who are skilled in marketing and PR to help me get the word out about, my podcast and my book. And I hope that, that's something that, I'm able to tap into the knowledge of that industry, because I'm not really a marketer. That's not, it's tell great stories, and hopefully someone else can help me get them out there and get discovered. Yeah. Yeah, no, it does make sense. Probably when I was having dinner in Houston at an Italian restaurant with a man who'd been accused of being a hitman, alleged to have killed, been hired to kill two people. And he was trying to tell me, no, it's all a big misunderstanding. I'm not that guy. And I'm sitting there like, does anyone else know I'm here? I cannot believe I'm talking to this hitman who's telling me he's not a hitman, right? So that was kind of one of those unusual days at the office for sure. I do have an alarming degree of accuracy, right? The husband did it, right? No. So no, it does get to be, part of why I left true crime television in the form that I was in is I felt like I had this sort of muscle memory for these murder cases, these hour-long tidy murder cases, and it's wild that it could become formulaic, but yeah, at some point it does. Yeah, so it would really vary story to story. So sometimes I would work on the same case for years before it would ever go to air, and then we would have what are called crashes, like when there was the Dallas police shooting. That was on a Thursday night, and we went to air Saturday night on our normal time slot. So that was just an unbelievable sprint. But we had deadlines, but it was an unusual type of TV journalism in that we didn't have any daily deadlines. Didn't even really have weekly deadlines. There were there were plenty of people in New York who were very happy to do one or two stories a year, which is just an insane pace for journalism. But I was always a little worried about like job security, so I was trying to do like 4 or 5 a year to be like, don't cut me out of your org chart. I'm very valuable here in Texas. So I tried to be very productive with getting stories on the air.
I think I've got one final question, then we're going to wrap it up. But I did remember in the story they talked about wanting a Texas person for these true crime shows. Do you think that Texas has an interesting relationship or a claim to true crime? It seems like we've got a lot of true crime going on in Texas. Yeah, what do you think about that?
So I think the heat makes people do crazy things. Look at Texas and Florida, right? Commit a lot of murder, especially in August. That's like when the murder rate spikes, right? So it's very interesting. So yeah, Texas kept me busy. I could find a murder story within a 30-mile radius of my house. That had never been on national television before. So yeah, Texas is a very fertile ground, unfortunately, for murder. Yeah.
Well, I am just so thrilled for you, and we all in Waco wish you the very best with your book launch, and we'll be cheering for you here at Fabled. And don't be a stranger.